first strike at enemy heartland. It was Saturday, April 18th, 1942. The place, somewhere in the Pacific. For 5 months, forces from the land of the rising sun had ruled the islands and sea. Crowded on the wet deck of the carrier Hornet were 16 B-25 medium bombers. The Hornet was heading for Japan. It had to get close, 400 miles off the coast, undetected. Under secret orders, Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle and his volunteers would take off from the carrier and blast key targets on the mainland. Each 2,000-pound load of bombs and incendiaries would hit where it hurt the most. Then the planes would race away, riding radio beams to hidden airfields in China. Every military aircraft had been considered for the challenging job. The B-25 was picked. Extra gear had been stripped away, so had the heavy Norden bomb sight, replaced with a simple ring sight. Each crew of 5 had been trained razor sharp until they could take their 25,000-pound bomber off half the deck of the carrier. Now wind was whipping the waves, frothing the sea. The huge carrier heaved up, then dropped heavily. The pitching was getting rough, getting to the sailors and flyers. There was one hope. They were still 800 miles from Japan. The sea just might calm down by takeoff time. During briefing, Doolittle was asked, "Colonel, what should we do if we have to crash land in Japan?" Doolittle's answer was quick.
Each pilot is in command of his own plane when we leave the carrier. He alone is responsible for the decision he makes for his plane and crew. Each man must eventually decide for himself what he'll do when the chips are down. Personally, I know exactly what I'm going to do.
Sir, what will you do?
I don't intend to be taken prisoner. If my plane is crippled beyond any possibility of fighting or escape, I'm going to bail my crew out and then dive at full throttle into any target I can find where the crash will do the most damage. I'm 46 years old. Most of you fellas are in your 20s. And if I were you, I'm not sure I'd make the same decision. It's up to each pilot and each man to decide what he'll do.
Suddenly, on the horizon, a Japanese patrol boat. Admiral Bull Halsey called Doolittle to the bridge on the double.
That ship must be radioing our position right now. We have to get out of here before their long-range bombers find us.
For Doolittle, it was now or never.
Army pilots, man your planes.
Navy men watched grimly as the B-25s prepared to take off. Timing for every pilot had to be perfect, or he would end up in the sea and be plowed under the carrier's hull. When the giant ship nosed down, Doolittle revved up his 2 Wright Cyclone engines, but held the brakes. Just before the ship's bow started up, he released his brakes and poured on full power. For 2 seconds, the B-25 raced downhill. Then, exactly as the ship's bow came up level, the plane reached the end of the deck. Doolittle was off. As the flight controller snapped his flag, 3-bladed props yanked each plane in sequence down 500 feet of deck. 16 B-25 bombers, all of them got off that pitching deck in a wind of gale force and headed due west. Doolittle looked at his watch. 5 hours. He peered through the morning haze. There it was, the coast of Japan. Harmless-looking puffs of black rose to meet the aircraft. All knew how deadly they were, for holes would suddenly tear a wing or a rudder. The planes flew on, some to Tokyo, others to Yokohama and Osaka. At 1,500 feet, bombardiers took over each plane's run. Targets were lined up in the simple sights. Warehouses, hurrying trucks loaded with new weapons, refineries, smoke belching in full production, factories churning out tools of war, munitions plants. At exactly 12:30 p.m. Tokyo time, Doolittle's bombardier pushed a toggle switch on his control panel marked "Bomb Doors Open." For a few breaths, there was nothing. Then, buildings burst, flames volcanoed upward. Steel and stone erupted, roared, and turned to rubble. The B-25s had hit hard. Then, with loads lightened, they turned away. Every plane made it. They raced on to find those Chinese airfields. None did. There were no signals, no directions. Afraid the Japanese would home in and attack, the Chinese kept their radios silent. Midnight. Gas tanks drained dry. Men bailed out, some crash-landed. The world was stunned. Headlines, Pearl Harbor avenged. Of the original 80 Doolittle raiders, 11 were captured or killed. Flyers remember the B-25 with fondness, pride. It was a sweetheart. We remember, too, for it gave Americans a lift in morale when we needed it most. Our men flew B-25s through jungle battles and island invasions right to the end, until peace was won. The B-25 is more than a memento, a reminder. It is our memorial to the volunteers who flew it to victory.